Welcome to the deep dive.
Hmm.
Today we're taking a deep dive into the world of short selling
Ooh.
and the rules that govern it.
Yeah.
Ever heard of Regulation SHO?
Mhm.
Think of it like the rule book for short selling.
Right.
And we're about to crack it open.
That's right. We're looking at some excerpts from
Oh.
a pretty dense but fascinating SEC document called Amendments to Regulation SHO,
Going?
release name 34-61595. It outlines a key change to those rules, and let me tell you,
Okay.
this change generated a ton of debate.
Yeah. Over 4,300 comment letters flooded the SEC.
Wow.
That's a lot of people
That's a lot.
with strong opinions.
Yeah.
But before we get into the nitty-gritty,
Right.
let's make sure we're all on the same page.
Absolutely.
Quick reminder, short selling is basically selling borrowed stock hoping to buy it back cheaper later for a profit.
Right. It's a bit like betting against a company's success.
Okay.
Now, the SEC was concerned that this kind of betting could make market downturns even worse,
Mhm.
especially after what happened in 2008.
2008, the year the financial world went a little haywire.
Right.
What's the connection to our deep dive today?
Well, before the 2008 crisis, the SEC had a rule called the short sale price test.
Okay.
Rule 10A1 for the sticklers out there.
Right.
It was meant to prevent short selling from driving prices down too fast.
Okay.
They got rid of it in 2007, and then, well, you know the rest.
Talk about bad timing.
Yeah.
So the SEC was basically rethinking their whole approach to short selling regulation.
Exactly. They started to believe that in a crisis, short selling could add fuel to the fire,
Oh.
making a stock's decline even steeper and contributing to overall market instability.
Yeah.
This led them to consider whether some kind of restriction was needed after all.
So it's all about finding that balance between letting the market do its thing and protecting investors from potential harm. Sounds like a tough job.
It absolutely is. And that's where our star of the show comes in,
Okay.
the SEC's new circuit breaker rule,
Okay.
also known as Rule 201.
Okay. Circuit breaker.
Hmm?
I'm intrigued. Break it down for me. How does this thing work?
Imagine a stock starts plummeting. If it drops 10% or more in a single day,
Yeah.
bam, the circuit breaker flips.
Okay.
Short selling then becomes restricted for the rest of that day, indeed the next.
So does that mean short selling is completely banned during that time?
Not quite. Instead, you can only short sell at a price higher than the best bid currently out there. Think of it like trying to catch a falling knife, but you can't grab it by the blade.
Okay.
You have to grab the handle, which is a little harder and definitely less risky.
Okay. That's a pretty vivid image.
Yeah.
But why choose this particular approach? Why not just ban short selling altogether during those volatile periods?
Well, the SEC debated a bunch of different options. They considered halts, different trigger levels,
Yeah.
even a straight-up ban, but they landed on the 10% drop in the uptick rule because it targeted those extreme panic-driven situations without completely shutting down short selling.
I see. It's about trying to find that sweet spot, protecting investors without hindering the legitimate functions of short selling.
Right.
So what were the arguments in favor of this new rule? Why did some people think it was a good idea?
Many proponents were worried about what they called the magnet effect. They believed that unrestricted short selling during a downturn could create a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Okay.
Prices drop, people panic.
Right.
They jump on the short selling bandwagon, and the stock plunges even further, like a magnet dragging it down.
And I imagine the SEC was especially concerned about that happening during times of widespread market turmoil,
Yeah,
when investors are already nervous and prone to overreacting.
absolutely. The rule was meant to inject a bit of stability and confidence into the market when things are going haywire. After all, it's hard to make rational decisions when everyone else is hitting the panic button.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But surely there was another side to this story, right?
Oh, yeah.
Not everyone was thrilled about this new rule.
Oh, absolutely. There was a whole chorus of critics who argued that short selling, when done responsibly, can actually be beneficial for the market.
How so?
Well, they said it helps to find the true price of a stock faster. They argued that short sellers can act as a sort of reality check, preventing stocks from becoming overvalued. And they pointed out that short selling provides liquidity, which basically means it helps to keep the market flowing smoothly.
So their concern was that this new rule was a bit too heavy-handed,
Right.
that it would catch legitimate short selling in its net,
Yeah.
even when it wasn't actually harming the market.
Exactly. And they also worried about the potential impact on market makers.
Hold on. Remind me who market makers are again.
They are the crucial players who provide liquidity to the market. They're constantly buying and selling stocks to ensure there's always someone to trade with.
Right.
Some critics argued that Rule 201 would make their jobs more difficult, potentially harming the overall functioning of the market.
So this debate really boils down to a classic dilemma: the balance between government regulation and market freedom. Where do you draw the line between protecting investors and letting the market do its thing?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And here's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
Even the supporters of the rule recognized that it couldn't be a one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah.
They agreed that it needed exceptions.
Wait, really? So even the folks who were all for restricting short selling acknowledged that there were times when it should be allowed.
Precisely. And those exceptions get to the heart of that delicate balancing act we were talking about. They were all about carving out space for activities that, even though they might technically involve short selling, were generally seen as beneficial for the market.
Give me some examples. What kind of activities got a free pass?
Well, one big one was arbitrage. It's a bit of a complex concept, but essentially it involves exploiting tiny price differences between different markets or securities.
So basically buying low and selling high,
Right.
but in a very sophisticated, lightning-fast way.
You got it.
Yeah.
And sometimes short selling is a crucial part of making those arbitrage trades work. The SEC recognized that restricting arbitrage would do more harm than good, so they made sure it was exempt from Rule 201.
Okay, that makes sense. Any other exceptions?
Yes. They also included exceptions for bona fide market-making activity.
Okay.
Remember those liquidity providers we were talking about?
Right.
They wanted to make sure that Rule 201 didn't prevent market makers from doing their jobs effectively.
So it was all about trying to fine-tune the rule to avoid any unintended consequences. They were trying to fix a problem, but they didn't want to accidentally break something else in the process.
Exactly. It's a constant challenge for regulators, trying to anticipate all the possible ripple effects of a new rule. But that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating.
Right.
It's a complex web of interconnected forces and competing priorities.
And it's a debate that's still ongoing today, right? Has Rule 201 actually achieved what it set out to do? Has it struck that perfect balance between protecting investors and keeping the markets running smoothly?
That's the question we'll be tackling in our next segment. Stay tuned.
Okay. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been exploring regulation, SHO, and its circuit breaker rule, Rule 201. We've talked about the WHY.
Right?
Now let's get into the HOW, how this rule actually plays out in the real world.
Yeah, it's like we've laid the foundation, now we're building the house. And to see the real impact of this rule,
Right.
we need to look at some concrete examples.
Okay, so let's paint a picture. Imagine a company called, let's say, TechCo.
Okay.
They're a hot new tech startup, listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Everyone's excited about their potential.
But then out of the blue, they miss their earnings projections by a mile.
Oh,
Investors get spooked, start selling off their shares, and the stock price starts tanking.
and we're not talking about a little dip here.
Wow.
We're talking a full-blown 10% drop in a single trading day.
Right.
That's when the SEC's circuit breaker Rule 201 flips on.
Exactly. Suddenly, short-selling TechCo becomes a lot harder. Remember, the rule doesn't completely ban it,
Right.
but it does impose that alternative uptick rule.
Right, that rule about only being able to short sell at a price higher than the current best bid. So it's like trying to slow down a runaway train,
Right.
not completely stopping it.
A good analogy. It's still possible to short sell, but the rule throws up a hurdle for short sellers,
Yeah.
making it less profitable and potentially discouraging some from piling on.
Okay, so let's say there's a short seller named Bob. He sees TechCo plummeting and thinks, this is my chance to make a quick buck.
Right.
But with Rule 201 in effect,
Yeah.
he can't just jump in and sell at any price he wants.
Nope. Bob has to find someone willing to BUY TechCo at a price higher than the current bid.
Right.
And that might not be so easy when everyone else is trying to sell. It's like trying to sell ice cream in a blizzard.
Yeah.
The demand just isn't there.
So the rule essentially creates a temporary price floor
Right.
for TechCo,
Right.
preventing the stock from completely collapsing.
Precisely. And the idea is that this breathing room gives the market a chance to stabilize, preventing a full-blown panic that could drag other stocks down with it.
Okay, so that's one scenario. But let's look at a different situation where Rule 201 might have a different impact. Imagine another company. Let's call it Pharma Inc.,
Okay.
a well-established pharmaceutical company with a solid track record.
But then, bam, they announce that their latest clinical trial for a potential blockbuster drug has failed.
Oh.
Bad news for Pharma Inc. And the stock price takes a nosedive.
Yeah.
Again, a 10% drop triggering Rule 201.
So the circuit breaker flips on the race, short selling becomes restricted.
Right.
But this time there are some short sellers who might actually have valuable information.
You're talking about the price discovery function of short selling, the idea that short sellers can sometimes help the market to more accurately reflect a company's true value.
Exactly. Let's say there's a hedge fund called Insight Capital that's been doing their homework on Pharma Inc.
Okay.
They've been digging into the research and have reason to believe the clinical trial was flawed from the start.
So even before the news becomes public, Insight Capital starts short selling Pharma Inc. because they believe the stock is overvalued. They're essentially saying the market doesn't fully understand the implications of this flawed trial, but BUE do.
And here's where the debate gets heated. Critics of Rule 201 would argue that Insight Capital is actually providing a service to the market.
Yeah, they'd say that by short selling.
Maybe.
Insight Capital is helping to correct a mispricing, bringing the stock down to a level that more accurately reflects its true value.
But supporters of the rule would counter that even if Insight Capital's intentions are good, their short selling could create a snowball effect, adding to the downward pressure on the stock and potentially causing a larger than necessary decline.
Exactly. They'd argue that Rule 201 in this case is providing a necessary buffer, preventing what might be considered informed short selling from turning into a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So in this scenario, the rule is prioritizing stability over what some might see as market efficiency. It's saying, let's give the market a chance to digest the news before allowing unrestricted short selling, even if it means delaying a price correction.
And that's the inherent tension at the heart of this rule, finding that delicate balance between protecting investors from potential harm and allowing the market to function freely.
But hold on, there's a twist. The SEC knew Rule 201 couldn't be a blanket rule. That's where these exceptions come in, and they're fascinating.
Yes, the exceptions are crucial. The SEC recognized that certain activities, even though they might technically involve short selling, play a vital role in maintaining a healthy, efficient market. And they wanted to make sure those activities weren't stifled.
So what are we talking about here? What kind of activities get a free pass?
Well, one of the most important exceptions is for arbitrage. Remember, that's all about exploiting tiny price differences between markets.
Right.
Let's imagine a global company, we'll call it Global Corp, whose stock is traded on multiple exchanges around the world.
Okay, I'm picturing it. Global Corp, big multinational company.
Right.
Stock trading in New York, London, Tokyo, the whole shebang.
Right. Now imagine an arbitrager. Let's call her Alice.
Okay.
Who spots a tiny price difference between Global Corp's stock on the New York Stock Exchange and the London Stock Exchange. Let's say, for the sake of our example, that it's trading slightly higher in New York.
Okay.
Alice, being the savvy arbitrager that she is, sees an opportunity. She buys Global Core stock on the London Stock Exchange where it's cheaper, and simultaneously sells short an equivalent amount of the stock on the New York Stock Exchange where it's more expensive.
Okay, a classic arbitrage play designed to profit from that tiny price difference.
Right.
But here's the catch. What if Global Core's stock suddenly plunges 10% on the New York Stock Exchange, triggering Rule 201?
Not at all. Remember, she's already short the stock in New York. If Rule 201 applied to her, she'd be stuck. She wouldn't be able to buy back those shares at the lower price to complete her arbitrage trade.
Right.
Her strategy would be completely derailed.
So that's why the SEC included a specific exception for arbitrage in Rule 201. They recognize that arbitrage,
Right.
while technically involving short selling, plays a vital role in keeping markets efficient and ensuring the prices across different exchanges stay aligned.
Exactly. Restricting arbitrage would create more problems than it solves. It's a great example of how the SEC tried to tailor the rule to avoid unintended consequences and maintain the overall health of the market.
Okay, I'm starting to see just how complex this whole thing is. It's not just about saying short selling is good or short selling is bad. It's about understanding the nuances, the different scenarios and the trade-offs involved.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that short selling can be a double-edged sword. It can play a beneficial role in the market, but it also has the potential to be destabilizing, especially during times of stress.
So with all these examples in mind, what are your thoughts? Does Rule 201 seem like a reasonable approach to regulating short selling? Or is it too heavy-handed? What stands out to you about these examples?
That's a great question, and it's one that we'll be exploring further in our next segment. We'll be digging into the research and the ongoing debate about whether this rule has actually achieved what it set out to do. Stay tuned for that.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been dissecting the SEC's Regulation SHO And its controversial circuit breaker rule, Rule 201,
Yeah.
looking at both the theory and real-world examples. But now,
Right.
let's get to the heart of the matter.
Did the SEC actually get it right?
That's the million-dollar question. Did this rule achieve what it set out to do? Remember, the whole point was to strike that balance,
Right.
protect investors from potential manipulation, but not stifle the good parts of short selling.
And that's where it gets tricky. The impact of Rule 201 is still debated to this day, and there's research to back up both sides of the argument.
Okay, let's dive into that research. What are some key findings?
Well, some studies suggest that the rule has indeed reduced volatility during those super stressful market moments, which was the main goal. But here's the kicker. Even the studies that show the rule working admit it's not a silver bullet.
What do you mean?
They found it's most effective when panic is at its peak.
Okay,
Think full-blown market meltdown, but the rest of the time,
yeah.
the impact is much less clear-cut. Some studies even suggest the rule might have unintentionally hindered price discovery, that process, where short sellers help reveal a stock's true value.
So it's kind of like that age-old debate. Government intervention versus letting the market run its course.
Right.
Too much of either, and you might end up causing more problems than you solve.
Exactly. And remember, the market is a constantly evolving beast. Since Rule 201 came out in 2010,
Yeah.
we've seen the rise of things like high-frequency trading and all sorts of new financial instruments. It's a whole new playing field.
So are you saying Rule 201 is outdated? Does it need a revamp?
That's the question regulators are grappling with constantly. Regulation isn't a set it and forget it kind of thing. The SEC is always monitoring the markets, gathering data, tweaking the rules, trying to stay one step ahead of whatever new challenge pops up. It's a bit like playing a never-ending game of whack-a-mole.
And that brings us back to you, dear listener.
Yeah.
Why should you care about all this? You might be thinking, I don't even short sell. Why does this matter to me?
Here's the thing. Even if you never touch a short sale, understanding these rules gives you a glimpse into how markets really work. It's like knowing the rules of baseball, even if you're just a spectator. You appreciate the game on a whole other level.
It helps you make sense of the headlines, those big market swings, and all the financial jargon that gets thrown around.
Absolutely. And remember, the world of finance is constantly changing. New challenges will emerge, new rules will be debated, and that quest for balance between freedom and control will continue.
So stay curious, keep learning, and don't be afraid to ask those tough questions. And hey, if you're feeling extra adventurous, you can always dive into the full SEC document yourself. We'll put a link in the show notes. But be warned.
It's dense. It's pretty dense reading.
We'll leave you with one final thought to chew on. Did the SEC strike the right balance with Rule 201? Has it stood the test of time? Or is it time for a fresh approach? These are the kinds of questions that keep the world of finance.
Yeah.
And our deep dives so fascinating. Thanks for joining us.